Maybe you clicked out of curiosity. Or maybe, without even knowing, you were looking for a quiet place where the words arrive slowly and silence has a seat at the table too. I've written this story with care, like stitching together memories, pain, and small discoveries, hoping that somewhere in it you might see a piece of yourself. If that happens, even for just a moment, stay. Listen for as long as you can, and if you feel like it, leave a little sign you are here. A few words, a thought, even just a still here. It doesn't have to be big, but sometimes that's how the most meaningful connections start. And if you want to hear more stories like this, you know what to do. I've tried, for most of my adult life, not to think about that night. But sometimes it plays on a loop, like a bad movie you can't shut off. I was 6. The first thing I remember isn't the words, it's the sound. A hard, angry pounding on my mom's bedroom door, the kind that makes the wood vibrate in its frame. It was 2 a.m., though I didn't know that then. I just knew it was pitch dark outside, and the air in the room felt heavy. I was already awake, sitting in my mom's lap. Her arms were wrapped so tightly around me that my little ribs ached. She smelled like laundry detergent and a faint trace of coffee, but under that, I could feel her heartbeat, fast, uneven. My chest still remembers it. When she opened the door, the smell hit me before the voices did. Beer and red wine, sour and thick. My grandfather, though I've never called him that, stood there shirtless, his belly pressing against the doorway, eyes glassy. Behind him, my grandmother leaned on the wall like she had all the time in the world, her wine glass tilted in her hand. They said things I didn't understand, about rent, about dead weight, about how my mom had made her choices. And then it happened. My grandmother's voice cut through everything. Trash sleeps outside. At 6 years old, I didn't know what that meant, but I knew it wasn't good because my mom froze. Completely still, like those words had hit her harder than the winter wind outside. Minutes later, we were standing on the front porch. The door shut behind us with a soft click, not a slam. She'd been careful about that, maybe so the neighbors wouldn't hear. Maybe so I wouldn't cry harder. The cold wrapped around us immediately. I remember my nose stinging, my breath turning to little clouds, and the thin blanket she'd pulled over my shoulders doing almost nothing. I didn't understand trash, but I understood outside. And that night, the cold became part of me in a way that never really left. The porch light was still on when we stepped outside, throwing long, sharp shadows across the snow-speckled driveway. My mom was trying to keep me close, tucking the blanket tighter around my shoulders, when I heard another sound. Not the wind, not the crunch of our shoes on the frozen steps. It was laughter. I looked up, and there she was. Avenue. My mom's younger sister. My aunt, though she never once felt like family. She was standing at the top of the stairs inside the house, one hand resting on the railing, the other playing with a strand of her perfectly curled hair. She'd just come home from somewhere, probably a party, her makeup flawless except for the smudge of dark lipstick at the corner of her mouth. Her smile widened when she saw us. "Finally," she said, her voice drifting down like she'd been waiting all night for this moment. "I thought they'd never throw you out. Guess they were getting soft." I didn't know what soft meant in that context, but the way she said it made my chest tighten. I glanced at my mom, expecting her to say something back, but her jaw was set, eyes locked forward. I tugged on the blanket and asked the only thing that came to my mind, my voice small in the freezing air. "Aunt Ava, are you happy?" Her grin turned sharper. "Oh, sweetheart, she said, tilting her head like she was letting me in on a secret. I'm thrilled. Mommy's finally learning where she belongs. She actually laughed after that, not the kind of laugh you hear when someone's telling a joke. It was short, dry, and final, like a door closing. At 6, I didn't understand the politics of my family. I didn't know about money, grudges, or the history that had built to this moment. All I knew was that, in that house, my existence was entertainment for some and a burden for others. And as the cold crept deeper into my bones, I realized something else. If people could smile while you froze, they were never going to let you back in. The days after that night blur together in my mind, like a string of mismatched snapshots. One frame is of a wooden park bench, cold metal armrests pressing against my sides while I tried to curl up under my blanket. Another is of us sitting on the curb outside a gas station, its lights off, the big closed sign glowing faintly in the window. I remember pressing my cheek against my... Another is of us sitting on the curb outside a gas station, its lights off, the big closed sign glowing faintly in the window. I remember pressing my cheek against my mom's arm to stay warm and staring at the vending machine inside, wishing I had quarters for the hot chocolate button. Eventually, we ended up in a women's shelter. The place smelled faintly of bleach and instant coffee, and the walls were painted the kind of pale yellow you see in old waiting rooms. There were other kids there, some loud, some quiet, but I kept to myself. The bed creaked every time I turned over, but it was soft, and there was heat. That was more than we'd had on the porch. I didn't know how my mom spent her days. Sometimes she'd be gone before I woke up and wouldn't come back until the sky outside our window was deep blue again. When she did return, she'd have that tired look, the kind that made her eyes seem heavier than the rest of her face. Her hair would smell faintly of fryer oil or cleaning chemicals, depending on the day. But no matter how late it was, no matter how cold her hands were, she'd sit on the edge of the bed, press her palm gently to my back, and rub slow circles until my breathing evened out. Sometimes I pretended to be asleep just to feel it longer. At 6, I thought work just meant leaving and coming back tired. I didn't understand that she was piecing together anything she could. Diner shifts, cleaning jobs, just to keep us moving forward. What I did understand was the pattern. Every time she disappeared into the night, she returned with that same mix of exhaustion and quiet determination. I didn't know it then, but each of those nights was a step toward something much bigger than survival. There's this image that stayed with me for years, clearer than most memories from that time. It's the way my mom's face looked in the glow of her phone. Back then, in the shelter, nights were either too quiet or too noisy. Some women whispered urgently on their beds, others cried into thin pillows. But on certain nights, my mom wouldn't lie down at all. She'd sit cross-legged on the mattress, phone in hand, her posture rigid like she was bracing for something. Her eyes didn't dart around like they did when she was scrolling for work ads or checking bus schedules. They were fixed, unblinking, like the whole world was happening inside that little screen. Sometimes her thumb would hover above the glass without moving, and she'd let out this barely audible exhale, the kind you make when you're waiting for a green light but don't trust the traffic. Then, just as suddenly, she'd lock the phone, tuck it under the blanket beside her, and lean back like nothing had happened. At 6, I assumed she was talking to someone she didn't want me to know about. Maybe a friend from before. Maybe someone who could help us. I didn't ask. Part of me was afraid the answer would be nobody. It wasn't until years later, after I'd moved out, after I'd learned how to see the world in full color, instead of the grayscale of childhood, that I understood what those nights were. She wasn't waiting for a call. She was learning, not the kind of learning you do with books or classrooms, the kind where you watch, memorize, and test until you can slip through the cracks unnoticed. She'd gotten a job at a small heating and cooling company a few weeks after we landed at the shelter. It was just a receptionist position, answering calls, scheduling maintenance, but it gave her something more valuable than a paycheck: access. And on those nights when I thought she was just staring into her phone for no reason, she was really mapping out the inside of my grandparents' house, learning how their new smart home system worked, what codes controlled what, and how to make it all bend to her will. I didn't know it then, but she was building the first bridge back to the place that had locked us out, not to return, but to take control. I didn't recognize the house at first. Sure, the siding was the same faded blue, and the maple tree still leaned a little toward the driveway, but standing there in the summer heat, the place felt smaller. Mom was wearing a navy polo shirt with a logo I couldn't read from where I stood, a clipboard in one hand, a small tool bag in the other. She told me to wait by her side, to keep quiet unless someone spoke to me directly. Her voice wasn't sharp, but it had a weight to it, a tone I'd never heard before. When the door opened, my grandmother stood there, hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, a faint red flush climbing up her neck. She blinked twice when she saw my mom. "You," she said flatly. Mom's smile was polite, almost sweet. "Here to fix your furnace issue. I hear it's been unbearable." My grandfather appeared behind her, shirtless again, but this time with his face bright red from heat, not alcohol. "It's a damn oven in here," he barked. "Your company screwed this up." And then my mom tilted her head just slightly and said, "Oh no, that sounds awful. Must be, what's the word?" She glanced at me, as if inviting me in on the moment. "Trashy?" The room went still. Even at my age, I could tell they knew exactly what she meant. From where I stood, it felt like watching a movie where the hero walks into the villain's lair, unarmed but completely in control. My mom wasn't pleading or apologizing. She was surveying the room like she owned it. She moved toward the wall panel and started tapping at the screen, her fingers quick and sure. My grandmother's eyes narrowed. My grandfather shifted his weight like he wasn't sure if he should speak or leave. And then I saw it. The thing I didn't know I'd been waiting for all along. Fear. Not mine this time. Theirs. It was in the way my grandmother's hand tightened on the doorframe. In the way my grandfather's voice caught when he tried to speak again. They didn't know exactly what my mom could do, but they knew she could do something, and that it wouldn't be in their favor. For the first time, I understood that power didn't always come from being the loudest person in the room. Sometimes it came from walking back into a place that once rejected you, wearing a smile that says, you don't need anything from them anymore. That day, my mom didn't just fix their system. She rewrote the story. After that day at the house, things went back to what passed for normal in our little apartment. I still went to school, still did my homework at the kitchen table, still waited for Mom to come home from work. But every so often, there were nights when she'd be later than usual. Not late in the way that made me worry, late in the way that felt intentional. She'd step through the door with the same tool bag I'd seen that day, set it quietly on the counter, and give me a look that wasn't tired at all. It was lighter, satisfied. I didn't ask questions then. As a kid, you learn the difference between the things you're supposed to know and the things you'll find out when you're older. I just knew that on those nights, she'd eat something small, hum to herself while washing her hands, and seem free. It wasn't until years later, over coffee at my first apartment, that she finally told me the truth. Those nights were her visits. She wasn't setting foot in the house, not physically. She didn't have to. With the admin access she'd quietly collected while working at the HVAC company, she could slip into their smart home system from anywhere. She'd time it carefully. Right before a dinner party, she'd trigger the hot water to run ice cold in the middle of a shower. On nights she knew my grandmother would be alone, she'd set the locks to cycle 3 times in a row, the deadbolt clunking into place like someone was trying to get in. And sometimes she'd make the lights flicker just as my grandfather opened his beer, enough to spill half of it down his shirt. None of it was dangerous. None of it could be traced. But it was enough to keep them guessing. Enough to make the house they'd once called a sanctuary feel unpredictable. They needed to know, she told me, stirring her coffee slowly, that safety and comfort aren't rights you can take for granted. Not when you've ripped them away from someone else. Back then, when I'd wait up for her to come home with that small, secret smile, I didn't realize I was seeing the first stages of a slow, deliberate justice. I was 17 the night she told me. We were in our small apartment, the one with the kitchen that barely fit a table for 2. The window over the sink was cracked open to let out the smell of garlic from dinner, and the city outside hummed with the low buzz of traffic. Mom was rinsing dishes when she suddenly turned off the water and just stood there. Her hands rested on the edge of the sink, shoulders slightly hunched, like she was deciding whether to say something she couldn't take back. "You're old enough now," she said without looking at me. "Old enough for what?" I asked, half expecting some awkward conversation about college applications or taxes. Instead, she dried her hands, pulled out a chair, and sat across from me. She didn't waste time on small talk. "You know about the smart home system," she began. "How I still have access. How I used it." I nodded. I'd pieced together most of that over the years. "What you don't know," she continued, her voice low, "is that one night, while I was in their system, I checked the camera archives. Just curiosity at first. I wanted to see if they ever talked about us." She paused, like she was choosing her next words carefully. "I found a clip from 2 summers before we were kicked out. Ava came home late. Her car bumper was dented, the paint scraped. I watched her stagger inside. A few minutes later, Mom and Dad joined her in the kitchen. They were whispering, but the camera's mic picked it up. She'd hit someone with her car, a cyclist. She didn't stop. I felt my stomach turn. Did he? She drove off. They found out later he broke his leg, but he survived. Your grandparents paid someone to make sure the report didn't go anywhere? The dent got fixed. The story disappeared. I stared at her, trying to reconcile the Ava in my memory, the one who laughed on the stairs that night, with this new version. "You kept it?" I asked. "Of course I kept it," she said, a sharp edge in her voice. "That's my insurance. They can't touch us, Willow. Not legally, not personally. One wrong move, and that video hits the police, the press, and everyone in their perfect little neighborhood." It was a strange mix of feelings, disgust at what Ava had done, anger at how easily they'd covered it up, and an unexpected sense of safety. For the first time in years, I understood why they'd stayed silent all this time. It wasn't kindness, it was fear, and my mom had made sure it would never go away. It didn't happen all at once. The changes were slow, like watching paint peel in a house no one bothers to maintain. Ava was the first to show cracks. She'd been the face of some regional boutique brand, her picture on billboards, in glossy magazines you'd see at the grocery store checkout. One day, her ads were just gone. The brand quietly replaced her with someone else, no explanation given. I only knew because I saw the empty spot on the billboard I used to pass on the bus to school. Grandma, who had once seemed to know everyone in her neighborhood, started keeping her curtains drawn. At church, she lingered in the back instead of chatting after service. The woman who used to send out Christmas cards to half the county suddenly acted like even eye contact might burn her. Grandpa started drinking more. That wasn't exactly new, but it changed. It wasn't the loud, stumbling kind I remembered. It was quieter, heavier. The kind that made him stare at the TV long after the program ended, just letting the static hum fill the room. They never confronted us, not once. But they also didn't disappear entirely. Every so often, a letter would show up in our mailbox, addressed in my grandmother's tidy cursive. Inside, there'd be a birthday card or a holiday greeting, always with a crisp $5 bill tucked inside. The words were stiff, almost corporate. "Hope you're doing well. Take care." No mention of the past. No apology that sounded like a person had written it. Sometimes my phone would ring, and I'd see their number. If I picked up, the voice on the other end was always careful, the tone polite to the point of being unnatural. They never asked for visits, never invited us over. It was like they were speaking from behind a locked door. And in a way, they were. Because every letter, every call, carried the same unspoken message. We remember what you have. We know what you could do. It was fear, disguised as civility, and my mom never let them forget it. These days, when I wake up, the first thing I see is sunlight spilling across the floor. It catches on the edges of the little rug in my bedroom, dances over the leaves of the plant Mom insists is thriving, even though I'm pretty sure it's fake, and fills the whole apartment with a kind of warmth you can't measure on a thermostat. Our place isn't big. The kitchen can only fit one person cooking at a time, and the living room doubles as a dining space when we have friends over. But it's ours. No one can lock us out of it. No one can tell us we don't belong here. The balcony is my favorite part. In the mornings, I sit out there with a cup of coffee, listening to the city wake up. I remember being little and coloring at the tiny patio table, Mom next to me with her tea, the light pouring in through the railing. That was the first time I said it. "Mommy, our new house has light." Back then, I only meant electricity. After weeks of cold, dark nights, the steady hum of the heater and the glow from a lamp felt like magic. Now, I hear those words differently. The light I see in this place isn't just from the sun or the bulbs. It's in the safety of locking the door and knowing it's our lock. It's in the quiet we choose, not the quiet forced on us by fear. It's in the freedom to open the windows without wondering who's watching or judging from across the street. Mom still keeps her old phone, the one she used back then. She says she doesn't need it anymore, but she hasn't thrown it out. Maybe part of her likes knowing the option is still there. For me, the real revenge isn't in what she could do to them. It's in what we've built for ourselves. This small, sunlit apartment is proof that we got out, stayed out, and made a life they can't touch. And every time the morning light hits our kitchen, I think, this is what safe feels like. It was late autumn when I went back. Not for a holiday, not for a reunion, just for myself. The neighborhood looked almost the same as it had when I was a kid. Same trimmed hedges, same mailboxes lined up like soldiers along the curb. The house was still that faded blue, though the paint had started to chip near the gutters. A couple of leaves clung to the porch roof, stubborn against the wind. I didn't go to the door. I didn't need to. From my coat pocket, I pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a single photo. Mom and me, sitting at our kitchen table in the apartment, sunlight streaming in from the balcony behind us. We were laughing about something dumb, probably the time I'd nearly burned toast and set off the smoke alarm. It wasn't staged, it wasn't posed, it was just Real. I slipped the envelope onto the porch, right against the welcome mat that had never really welcomed us. No note. No return address. Just the image. Before I left, I looked up at their windows. The blinds were half closed, a faint light leaking through, the kind of light that feels defensive, not warm. I turned to the camera in my hands, the one I'd been using to document the story, and said it plainly, my voice steady. This light, they'll never turn it off. Then I walked away, the sound of dry leaves under my boots the only thing breaking the silence. Because the truth is, the real win isn't in what you take from people like them. It's in what you build that they can't touch. And sometimes the harshest punishment is letting them live in the shadows they made for themselves, knowing they'll never step into your light.